violence against the father. For when we are born into this life, we have goals, desires, dreams, and aspirations, and we strive to get the things that we want. And if we happen to not do that, then there are those things that we need to survive. Things like companionship, food, water, shelter, and heat. These are basic drives that motivate us, that push us towards a desired goal, a desired outcome, a desired dream. Sometimes, when we strive towards a goal, we may face obstacles in our path, things that block our way or make it difficult to achieve whatever we may desire. We may work to go around these obstacles, to jump over them, but sometimes they stop us in our tracks. When this occurs, we have to stop and pay attention to the obstacle and figure out a way to maneuver around it. We strive towards goals, and sometimes we fail to achieve them. We may follow a particular sequence of actions, something that we call a plan, and we may not reach our desired outcome. When this occurs, we need to stop, sit down, and reflect, to look back on our past actions and what we have done, and to see where we may have strayed off the path. At this point, there are two ways in which we can work to proceed and change our actions in order to achieve our desired outcome. The first is the brute force method, where we try our sequence of actions over and over again, tweaking some parts of our plan, expecting a different outcome, and sometimes introducing some randomness, actions that make no sense at all, in order to increase our probability of success. We may do this for a long period of time, and if we are lucky, we may strike gold. But I think this is a low-level sacrifice, and there is a better way, one that we call thought and imagination. For instead of brute forcing our way to a solution, we may sit down and think about a solution, go through different scenarios, different sequences of actions, different plans in our heads, and try to imagine which plan may lead us to success or may give us the highest probability of success. Of course, both of these plans take time and energy, but I think the latter is cheaper than the former. As we continue to strive towards our desired goal and still fail to achieve and still fail to reach what we may need to live, to survive, this may make us resentful. We may cast our anger out into the world, and sometimes directly up at God. For we need to know why our sacrifices lack and why we continue to miss the mark. For we may not be aligned properly, and worse, we may be aiming at the wrong mark, and therefore we will sin continuously. For in Genesis 4:6, it says, And the Lord said unto Cain, Why is thou wroth, and why has thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, then sin lieth at your door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. For sin is to miss the mark set for you by your God, by your ideal, by your particular dream, by your wants and your needs, by the domain that you inhabit, and by the judges that cast their eyes on you. For there is a difference between who we are and our actions. Even though our actions may be sinful, we are infinitely redeemable. I think that is something that Cain did not understand when he saw that his sacrifices were not being accepted, when he realized that he continued to miss the mark, even though he worked just as hard as anyone else, even though he found his own sacrifices valuable, his domain did not. God rejected his sacrifice, for he did not find them pure and worthy. For when God rejected Cain's sacrifices, Cain reacted like God had rejected him and killed Abel in retaliation. For Abel was his ideal. Abel was what he wanted to become. Abel could have taught him his ways, could have shown him why his sacrifices were worthy. For in this learning, in the lesson, Cain would have found forgiveness. But he chose otherwise. For when he killed his ideal, he was cursed and went out from the presence of the Lord. For his punishment was more than he could bear, but one that he had to bear. For the Lord marked him, so that no one may kill him, if they ever came across him. When we find ourselves missing the mark, we must stop and reflect, and most importantly, we must ask our Father, our God, why it is that our sacrifices are not worthy. And in this questioning, we choose to battle with our ideal. For there is no forgiveness in killing. There is no forgiveness in blunt, brute force. For when we wrestle, we make space for learning. We make space for us to be able to map our own body, to map our surroundings, and to map ourselves in relation to others. In wrestling, there is learning, and within these lessons that we take from these encounters, there is forgiveness. For it is not enough to play the game once. We must play the game over and over again, and be willing to lose in order to gain a greater lesson in return. For the aim is not to win, but to learn. And within this learning, we may make our aim true and hit the mark. For this violence against the Father is to yearn for punishment for insufficient offerings, to yearn for a lesson someone to teach you how to be better, to forgive you for all your actions, and to redeem you and make you clean. But before you choose violence against a father, you must make sure that his wife is far removed. Take him far away. Take him up the mountain. Choose violence against him constantly. Believe that he loves the violence too, that the violence is good for the both of you. For when you miss the mark, sin creeps closer to your door. For we know that the devil is a liar, and he was a murderer from the beginning. For we must be able to differentiate between the teachings of the Father and the teachings of the devil. We must know which is truth and which is sin. And in order to do this, we must acquire discernment. And this discernment is acquired through the wrestling with your Father, through the lessons that you learn from the tumbling, through the forgiveness and the redemption that you receive from the lessons that you learn. We know that there are things that we can do in order to make our lives better. There are some things that make our life worse. We may say that the rational thing to do is to always choose the things that make us feel good, that make life better in the moment, and to rid ourselves of the actions that bring about pain, displeasure, discomfort, and uncertainty. But this is not always the case, for we are not only conscious of our present, but our future as well. And maybe the health of the future person that we will become may be more important, may take precedence over who we are today. And in that, there comes sacrifice. We give up a pleasure now for a gain tomorrow. Or we take on a pain now for a pleasure in the future. And through these lessons that we learn when we wrestle with the Father, our sacrifices become more pure, become more true. We become more aligned and are better able to hit the mark consistently. After the lesson, there isn't much forgiveness left for us to gain. For in Hebrews 10:26, for if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifices for sin. For when we sin with intention, when we sin with knowledge, there are no more lessons left to redeem us. And within those acts, we sense a bit of malevolence. There is no malevolence in our actions when we do not have the knowledge of our sin. It is only through this wrestling with the God that we acquire this knowledge. For in this wrestling, we acquire discipline. For in Hebrews 11:4, it says, by faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he, being dead, yet speaketh. For sacrifices seldom work on their own. They need their accompanying spiritual component. For there may be two people striving for the same goal, performing the exact same actions, the exact same time, in the exact same place. But one is faithful and the other is not. For the faithful man is righteous, and in his righteousness he obtaineth favor from the Lord. The wrestling and violent encounters with the Father sanctify and wash you with their lessons. For in Ephesians 5:26 it says, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. For there comes a time in a man's life when the Father can no longer illuminate the darkness cast on his Son beyond the unknown. For all this time, the Son has looked towards the Father to know what lies beyond the unknown. For the Father is older, is wiser, has more experience, and has forgiven less. For when this time comes, the Son must look forward into the unknown and venture deep into the darkness to find a new Father that he fears more than the unknown. For Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. That is Proverbs 2:1, a very profound verse and one that rings true across all areas of life. For the Lord gives knowledge to those who ask, understanding to those who cry, and wisdom to those who search for it with all their heart. For a father knows how far he can push a young man before he breaks, and it is on this edge that he comes to the knowledge of self. For there is very little difference between knowing thyself and wrestling with the Father. For if you do not know, and you know that your Father doesn't know, then you can rest easy in the faith that your Father knows you, and he knows how far he can push you into the unknown before you break. With this faith, you will have the courage to venture out into the unknown and bring back lessons that will be of sustenance for the both of you. For believe me when I say that the biggest disappointment to a father is a son that never chose violence, a son that loved him unconditionally, a son that never cast his judgment on him, a son that forgave, a son that chose love over reason, a son that failed to turn his back and walk away. For a father cannot produce milk, so it baffles him when his son looks to him for care and nurture. He asks himself, is my son blind? Have I failed to remove the mucus from his mind's eye? Am I perfect? He knows he is not perfect, and therefore he is not something to be loved. For in these lessons that we learn when we wrestle with our Father, we may fall into the act of studying, reading, and learning for the sake of knowledge itself, and not for wisdom. For learning for the sake of learning is a useless act. You need to push up against something simultaneously. For why would one kneel, bring his hands together, and relieve himself of all responsibility? It is not a submissive act when it is before God. Its acceptance, its belief, its war. A man with no war is a man that believes in nothing. And a man that believes in nothing cannot learn, for belief attributes meaning to action, and reading or learning without belief has no meaning. For a man, it is not enough to just have a child, for that child is not his. Marriage may give him a claim on his child, but that is still not enough. You need to be able to reproduce yourself in your children, to pass on your teachings and your memes, to pass on the knowledge of Him that is from the beginning, so that they may overcome the wicked one, to teach the little ones, so that even though they may not believe, they may still know the Father, so that it may be written unto thee. 1 John 2:13. I write unto you, fathers, because ye have known him that is from the beginning. I write unto you, young men, because ye have overcome the wicked one. I write unto you, little children, because ye have known the Father. For the good Father gives himself up as an offering for his children. At the edge of your sanctification, you will be honored with the sanctifying sacrifice of your Father. For in John 14:7, if ye had known me, ye should have known my Father also. And from henceforth ye know him and have seen him. And I will close with Genesis 32:28. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed.